Dr. Wheelock is Vice President and Deputy Director of Research here at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, where he has been employed since 1993. Before joining the Federal Reserve, Dr. Wheelock was on the faculty of the University of Texas at Austin and a visiting scholar here at the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank. He has published numerous articles on banking and monetary policy issues in academic journals and Federal Reserve publications, including a number of articles on the Great Depression. In addition, he is the author of The Strategy and Consistency of Federal Reserve Monetary Policy, 1924 to 1933, published by the Cambridge University Press. Dr. Wheelock served as the economic advisor on the team that developed the St. Louis Federal Reserve's Great Depression curriculum. I have used lessons from that curriculum. If you have not used it yet, I think you would find it a very, very valuable classroom resource. He often speaks to educators who participate in economic education programs at the St. Louis Federal Reserve, and he has received his bachelor's degree from Iowa State University, his master's and PhD from the University of Illinois. It is with great pleasure that I take this opportunity to present to you David Wheelock, who will talk about the Great Depression and current economic issues. Dr. Wheelock.
Good morning. I'd like to also extend my welcome to you. We at the St. Louis Fed have been excited for more than a year knowing that your group is going to be coming and visiting us and spending a couple of days with your conference here. So we're really delighted to have you and hope you enjoy your visit to the St. Louis Bank. As Joan said, I will be talking about the Great Depression, but in a somewhat different format than is typically the case. When I was a graduate student at the University of Illinois, I was a student of Professor Larry Neal, who's an economic historian. He's written a lot about financial crises throughout history, the Mississippi bubble, the South Sea bubble, the various, the French Revolution and how that affected the world. And he would teach financial history courses, and one year I was his teaching assistant, and he tried an experiment, which was at least an experiment for him, which was to teach the course backward. In other words, start at the present and work back and see how far back he got. Every history class I'd ever taken as an undergraduate up to that point, it always started at some point and gone up as far as you could go, and then kind of petered out at the end of the semester. And that was typically, the Civil War, or maybe you get up to the 1930s, you never get beyond that. But I thought that was kind of a clever thing. So when I got to the University of Texas and was an assistant professor there, I also had my own financial history class. And one time I tried a similar experiment where I would start with a current economic problem, discuss it, and then go back and look at historical parallels or similar episodes in the past. I was at Texas in the late 80s. That was during the big S&L crisis. And it was after the oil prices had declined in Texas, and Texas at that time was not a very diversified economy. That wiped out all the savings and loans and banks that were in Texas, and it was a big crisis that was something that the kids I was talking to could get their hands around. They sort of had an idea of what that was about. Well, I took the current crisis, the S&L crisis, and then went back and looked at previous episodes, the Great Depression being a principal one, where there were similar wipeouts of the banking system, talked about similarities and differences. We have deposit insurance now, so the fact that my bank was failing, I didn't really care because I knew that the FDIC was there to bail me out when the bank failed, and indeed it did. But I mentioned that to my mother, who was a little girl during the Depression, and she thought I was crazy to keep my money in a bank that was on shaky ground, because she had seen her parents lose their savings in a bank that had failed in the Great Depression when there was no federal deposit insurance. So, kind of doing that history in reverse was kind of a unique experience. I did it one time. I left Texas. I came here, and since then I've been doing other things. But I want to try to revive that methodology today because in the last 2 or 3 years we've lived through a similar period of severe financial and economic distress. And so I want to talk about what's been going on in the United States really since early 2007 and then relate that back to and compare it with our experience from the Great Depression. So looking back through the lens of history, I want to ask a few questions. What happened in the financial system and the economic system of our country? 2007 to 2009 was the period of the financial crisis and the recession. Since then, we've had a recovery of sorts of our economy, but it's been very slow. It's been an unusually weak recovery of our economy. The unemployment rate remains exceptionally high. And so, there are important questions. Why has the recovery period been so weak? Well, to try to get some perspective on that, I will go back and make some comparisons with the economy in 1929 to 33, which is the downswing, the contraction phase of the Great Depression. The recovery phase began in 1933 and really continued up into World War II. And so the question is, are there lessons from the Great Depression experience which are useful for understanding what we've been going through in the last 3 or 4 years in the United States? I'm required, not exactly by law, but by custom at least, to remind you that everything I say today is if not completely off the record, it's my own views and are not necessarily representative of official positions of the bank or of Ben Bernanke or anybody else in the Federal Reserve System. So, although Ben agrees with me on this. So let me talk a little bit about the financial crisis. I don't have to dwell on it very long because, of course, it's a pretty simple event to understand, not very complicated at all. Just a few moving parts, and you can quickly understand what happened during the financial crisis. Obviously, it was a pretty complicated thing. It even was complicated for some really smart people, and Chairman Bernanke is a really smart guy. I don't know. I've only met him a couple of times, but he's really scary smart. I mean, I think we've been lucky to have him in the position he's been in the last few years. He's been taking an awful lot of heat from both sides of the political spectrum, all sides of the political spectrum. You may not always agree with all of his policies, but I think he's always had the country's interests first and foremost in mind, and is really a man of integrity as well as great intellect. So let me talk a little bit about the recent financial crisis and the recession. It's clearly been quite a train wreck. So is undoubtedly the worst financial crisis in the United States since the Great Depression. It resulted in a very severe recession, the worst recession we've had since the 1930s. But I'll put it in a little bit of context. It was not nearly as bad as what our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents went through during the 1930s. One reason the current recession has not been as bad, I believe, is because our monetary and fiscal policies have been much more aggressive in trying to respond first to the crisis and then to bring about a recovery from the recession. And in part that's because Chairman Bernanke and others have been students of the Great Depression and have taken that to heart. And then lastly, as I say, I want to address this question, why has the recovery been so weak? There are again some parallels with the recovery from the Great Depression. So we've got a lot of ground to cover here in the next 45 minutes. I'm happy to be interrupted with a few questions. There will be another session at 12:30 for those of you who want to explore this in more depth. I don't have any prepared remarks at 12:30, but I'll just be there to answer questions or to help with discussion or whatever. That's just one of your optional sessions at 12:30. So I want to kind of give the overview in the next 45 minutes. Again, occasional interrupting questions are fine. So maybe I'm not quite sure how much material I've got vis-a-vis my hour. I will say, though, if you do want to ask a question, I've been asked to remind you to flip on the microphone switch in front of you because they are recording this presentation and want to capture the questions on the tape as well as the answers. So flip on the microphone if you do have a question. Okay, so let me talk a little bit. We're now current events or reasonably current events, and I'll just give you a quick timeline of how the financial crisis, not the recession, but the financial crisis unfolded.